All right, hey guys, thanks for joining me this afternoon. So kind of what I want to talk about today a little bit is the HTC Vive trackers, just kind of a show of hands out in the audience. How many of you guys are developers? About a third of you. How many of you guys are business professionals either in the VR space or looking to be in the VR space? Awesome. So I think a lot of kind of what we see out in the industry is this really great kind of convergence of those that are capable of creating experiences and those that actually also know what the industry needs and what to create. So a lot of today's conversation is really more about the why versus the how. Why to use a tracker versus how to do it. And then we'll talk about why or how to even do it a little bit at the end there as well. But we'll talk about the overview of the market. And some of the reason why I wanted to do that is we're actually fortunate from HTC to actually have a baseline for data. There's a lot of data out there. It seems every other different analyst talks about the same things very differently. So when we look at data, we can really kind of extrapolate from what we know from either our sales or from what our developers and partners are doing, and then really try to make sense of the rest of the data. So we'll talk about that really briefly, and just the market and the opportunities. So as you're defining your VR strategies or placing your bets, or just trying to figure out what to make, because you can make things where there's traction, and then really talk about the tracker projects. Some of the great ways to even show what's going on in the tracker is really to showcase some of the great works devs are doing, and I hope we can have some time at the end for some Q&A. So my name is Vinay. I run the strategy and ecosystem expansion for HTC Vive. I was actually very fortunate to have been kind of this part of the Vive journey since the early days, since actually before Vive was Vive. And some of those early days have been really interesting because as we were kind of defining what we wanted to do in the space, we had to learn quite a bit. And part of that was we knew the future of VR had to be a very practical one. And we knew that content was going to be super important. And so as we were trying to find those partners that knew how to develop, since day one, the future of immersive technologies, whether it's AR, VR, or XR, the convergence of such, has been driven, will continue to be driven by the development community. And so as we were trying to find these partners, teach them how to do stuff in VR, also learn from them how to do stuff in VR, what was really apparent is if those guys that made great content weren't around 3 months from now, and if media saw those guys and asked to try their demos again 3 months from now and said, oh, these great studios are going out of business, that would have killed the industry 2 years ago. So as we were trying to make sure a lot of our partners stayed in business, we actually had to learn how to create a business. So kind of defining the VR market, as we kind of look at different technologies, as those involved in immersive technology space, I think it's very important for us to openly embrace all platforms and all technologies and understand where they are in your toolkit, right? Immersive technology is your toolbox, and you have different tools that make a lot of sense. Where you have cardboard, for example, although the level of immersion is very low, your total addressable market's really high, and there's a time and place for a lot of those things. Why is immersion important? Immersion is important because at the end of the day, immersion drives value. That is the reason why VR has been around for decades, but also in the latest growth of VR, it's the consumerization of such. So when there's high immersion, there's high value, and high value at the end of the day means you're gonna make money in the space. But that doesn't mean naturally you wanna kind of jump to what's highest in immersion, because you wanna get people to actually try on a headset. And that's where mobile, cardboard, those type of platforms are great, because I can just hand somebody as they're walking by and have them put that on. So it's less kind of abrasive, or it's easier to get somebody into than saying, okay, you have this Vive headset that comes on. But once they try things and you've piqued their imagination, pulling them through to say, hey, would you actually like to take a step forward? Do you actually want to bend down and pick up that cat? When they say yes, that's when he's like, okay, let me go ahead and try this. And that approach has worked really well for a lot of the companies that we've worked with over the course of the years to get to a larger audience, because to know VR, you have to try VR. As we look at these growth categories in VR, SuperData is actually one of my favorite analyst firms, just because I think they take a lot of time trying to get inputs from different stakeholders in the industry, and I think that is super critical. And how we interpret data is also pretty interesting. When we were looking at SuperData information, if you look at the different categories, one thing is clear, that the VR market is growing significantly. 2016 was year 0. 2017 is year 0.5 of a new industry. So to think that you're going to reach mass adoption as something launches has never happened in the history of technology, so we shouldn't assume that as much. But does that mean we can't make money in the space now? Not at all. And we'll talk about how and how the Vive Tracker enables you to do so. But as this data was published, a lot of people are saying, if you look at attractions, for example, attractions went from 33% to 18% to projected at like 8%. And a lot of people started to pull out of location-based attractions. But what they kind of fail to understand is I'd rather be 8% of 20 billion than 18% of 1.3 billion. And when you look at this data, actually what you really start to realize is industries are starting to normalize, meaning VR is starting to get in more and more places and starting to become a lot more ubiquitous. And so when you kind of start to see this data, it matters if you're a VC, it matters if you're playing the long game, but it doesn't matter if you're passionate about something and if you have customers that are willing to pay for experiences that drive value for their organization. But in all, stuff is growing and you start to seeing the industry normalize, which is actually a really amazing thing. So who's buying and how much are they buying? On average, you're seeing $40 a month in content purchases, but we're seeing that grow more and more. In fact, Viveport, which is HTC's non-gaming content distribution platform, actually had a subscription service that we launched. A lot of it had to do because there's so much content out there, and there's a lot of non-gaming content out there as well, but it's really hard to find what content do I really want to try, right? How much do I really spend to try these things? So sometimes we kind of pull back and wait to hear about the good stuff. So we created a free subscription service that actually, I think the first 30 days actually ends today. But what we've seen there is by trying different pieces of content for free from a subscription model, developers are able to get more exposure, but then people are finding things they like. And actually, that $40 a month, you're going to start to see that grow. And more importantly, I think as you kind of see the average, whether it's time spent or dollars spent, PC kind of continue to grow in that space. But $40 may not seem like, oh my God, now I'm going to be rich because the total addressable market's really small. Where is their value? How can I really create a path for profitability for myself? And that's really where it comes for non-gaming. Non-gaming is the fastest growth sector for VR, on AR, and actually all things within R. And that makes a lot of sense because VR and AR really drive value for an industry. And what that really means is you do something, there's an ROI, therefore I'm willing to pay for that ROI. So VR customers, where an average gaming customer may spend $40 a month on content, VR content in non-gaming, you're talking about an experience that is multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars that a company is willing to spend to build that same experience for their platforms. And where is this growth really coming from? Product industries are really right now number one, and product industries are those that are actually building a product, whether it's manufacturing, auto manufacture and design. And a really good example of the why is product industries growing. Take car design, for example. Car design, from the time you have a concept to the time you clay model a car, it's a multi-year process. And that's multi-years of sunk costs and development. So by the time you see a full-scale clay model of a car and you don't like it, well, guess what? You're not changing much because you already spent years of R&D costs into that model. We saw with Jaguar, and Audi, they were able to take clay model from concept to actual clay model in a matter of months. And also for Jaguar, that was the first time for their I-Pace concept car that they were able to actually put exterior engineers and interior engineers in at the same time before a prototype of the car was built. And that may seem like pretty crazy stuff, but that's across the board. You're seeing this stuff happen in industries. Therefore, you're seeing so much growth happening in that space, right? And auto manufacturing is a great story. You can talk about these guys for a long time because not only on the design side are they pulling these things through, but also now they're taking that to the dealerships, right? So it's very expensive for cars to have every single make and model configuration, but in headset, designed properly by great developers, I can have every single version of that car at my fingertips. And that's not just about, hey, do I really want to buy a car or not? It's actually more about this car costs X amount of dollars. Now I'm willing to spend a lot more money on that car. And that's been really impactful for the space as well. And of course, architecture and engineering, medical, film, and growing segments of like government and defense are kind of natural homes for VR. So we really kind of talked about how do you make money in the space. Who's leading this charge? It's going to be game developers. Game developers have led the VR kind of charge and will continue to do so in this space, a lot of it has to do is because game dynamics, how to make VR compelling, that expertise lies in the development community, even before VR. If you take a training simulator, let's say a fast food training simulator, if I'm a manager, I don't want to know how to do things in VR. I want to put on a headset and just be trained. And game developers know that if I have 5 different employees, some may come to work on time, some may be good at the cash register, some may be great at the fryers. A traditional non-game developer might have you go to a tutorial to understand these things, and you've actually talked to that employee. A game dev is going to put a health bar on top and give you those 4 metrics and say who's really good at those things. And then when all of a sudden you have all these people show up, maybe a tour bus came in at a McDonald's, and you need to know how to quickly get those guys through the line, you have those meters and really quickly make those management decisions. You can do that in a matter of minutes in a properly designed VR scenario, when in reality, that takes weeks to do in the current environment. And game devs know that right off the bat. We talked about non-gaming content and really projects that drive ROI, that drive value. You'd be surprised that's not common sense, right? So as more and more companies go in, the key here is when you're talking to non-gaming companies, you don't sell VR first, right? You really kind of talk about their business, how to kind of solve that value stream, and then you really use VR as a tool to really kind of drive that value. And that value really means money back in your pocket. And whereas there's been some anecdotal talks about, are people really making money in this space? There are a lot of companies making money in VR, and a lot of them are in non-gaming. There's a lot of game developers making money too, but there's definitely a lot of value there. And most importantly, just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should. So for companies, it's really, you want to solve a problem for them, right? And I think the trackers and those that have done some great work in the trackers really kind of show a lot of that. So let's actually talk about the trackers. So I want to kind of showcase one of the partners that we have, 2-Bit Circus, and their thought process and the why of doing a tracker. And if the guys in the back could actually play this video for me.
My name is Eric Gradman. I'm co-founder and mad inventor at 2-Bit Circus. 2-Bit Circus is a Los Angeles company dedicated to the future of fun. We're building a micro amusement park in downtown Los Angeles filled with our favorite crazy high-tech games: virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, robots, lasers, and fire. It's gonna be amazing. A lot of the games we're working on right now involve taking your friends with you into VR, either because they join you all with headsets on their heads, or you're playing together in some way, in an asymmetric way. We are so excited to have gotten to play with the new Vive trackers. When these things came out, we absolutely marveled at the laser-guided awesomeness that made them work. And then we got these. They chopped the head off and made it possible for us to put these on anything. It's amazing. There's just unlimited uses for these Vive trackers. We've put them on cameras for mixed reality setups. You can put them on hands and feet for body tracking with inverse kinematics. We've put them on weapons like frying pans and tactical pogo sticks. One of the most exciting things we've been exploring is asymmetric play, and that's what makes Pinata Party so cool.
Hi, I'm Mike Longley. I'm a game designer here at 2-Bit Circus. Pinata Party is a VR experience that pits players against a real-life pinata in a rush to destroy and collect as much candy as they can within the allotted amount of time. Players use actual tracked objects like a bat or a vacuum or a pinata. Fernando is the pinata we use in Pinata Party. He is tracked both in the physical and game world thanks to the Vive tracker on his butt.
All right. 2-Bit Circus is one of our favorite kind of developers that are out there. And if you look at some of these experiences, the data earlier said entertainment or location-based is actually shrinking. If you were to kind of follow data blindly, you would think these guys are not making money and what they're doing is actually irrelevant. But it's so relevant that they're actually building a location-based theme park in LA because the value they drive is so compelling. And also the industry is also growing collectively as a whole. So why the Vive tracker? Our goal as HTC has always been developer first. We're all about the community. In fact, you'll rarely hear HTC talk about HTC. We'd much prefer to spend that money on our developers to help showcase their content, and that way they can actually talk through their experiences and how Vive enables those experiences to happen. Developing tracked peripherals is very expensive, and we understand that. So that's kind of why we wanted to reduce developer costs and really help the creators kind of create those different fantastic ideas that go beyond the form factor of a controller, but also rapid prototyping. Rapid prototyping is actually key for a variety of reasons. A lot of content studios, a lot of these other developer kind of places think that VCs are going to save your company, but what you don't realize is if you go down the VC path too soon, the less value or ideas or structure that you have in your company, the more VCs take from you from a share of equity. Therefore, the more equity you give up, the more control and the more dreams you give up as well. So the goal always should be self-funding and then to use VCs to accelerate that growth. And where does acceleration come from is prototyping. Prototyping allows you to kind of have these different proof of concepts that some may work, and you may realize that having 3 or 4 different prototypes, and especially in trade show environments like these, getting your hands into your product into the hands of general consumers, then really starts to you start to figure out what sticks, right? And the Vive Tracker allows you to get to prototypes phase really, really quickly. And also an ecosystem. It's one thing to have controllers, it's one thing to have a tracking puck, but what about all the other cool stuff that's gonna happen in VR? What about that really amazing AR-15, or that bazooka, or better yet, that bat, or maybe for enterprise, I'm a physician that actually wants a scalpel. With the Vive Tracker, you're actually allowed now to not have to worry about the expensive integration of sensors and boards, but you can actually create those things 3D printed and mount trackers to them, right? And in fact, it also enables hardware manufacturers to build accessories that you can actually snap a tracker onto for a fraction of the cost. And that's great news for the industry because now all of a sudden there's an ecosystem of products that's within reach. And also to create new immersive experiences, the development community will know best of how to evolve the VR platform. And the Vive Trackers allows you to kind of figure out new ways to do locomotion, new ways to do many other things, and to really kind of get that as soon as possible. Some of the early tracker projects. At CES, we announced we're going to give away 1,000 trackers. We had close to 3,000 submissions, and on average, everyone's asking for 2 to 3. And actually, believe it or not, myself, actually JB's here as well, and a few other folks. Actually, raise your hand, JB, because if you have any questions, please come talk to me and JB as well. But we went through all of them. Actually, my team and we went through every single submission to really understand what you guys were thinking, how we can support, but also to make sure that a third of these kits didn't go to just gun manufacturers, right? We really want the gamut, even if it is a harness that tracks your cat in a track space, which is a pretty great idea if you've ever accidentally stepped on your pets or your children. So full body tracking was super popular. The ability to actually walk, use your feet was actually really amazing. In fact, I actually did this talk at Vision, and I had a company come up to me and says, hey, I figured out how to put pressure sensors in your feet. So that way, you don't need a tracker on your hip. I can just put 2 on your feet. And as you lean on one side, I know where your hips are at. And I was like, it's freaking genius, right? But that's actually table stakes in VR these days. But more importantly, those are things that we want to know. And I'll show you, put up an email address too, that you guys can actually submit your ideas. Because not only do we want to help you build these things, we can help you guide your product development process, right? What's a good idea, kind of what sticks. In fact, JB is actually doing a talk tomorrow on how to submit your VR content ideas. Location-based, we talked about that earlier. IMAX theaters are pretty big. There's even, you're looking at different ballparks that are using kind of baseball simulators as well, using the Vive Tracker. And then physical object tracking. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but really whatever you want to track in this space, you can. And it's actually surprisingly easy to develop your own experiences in there. And then we talked about rapid prototyping as well. Some of these ideas are just fantastic and just wild, but they're ridiculous. But I really kind of akin it to having that kind of project car that you have at home that you or in your garage that you kind of tinker on. Although you may not ever drive it, you learn so much about that process, and this allows you to do and it kind of expands your kind of thoughts on that. So where a lot of these ideas are coming from, health and wellness has been pretty big. Obviously games, but you notice games is only 15%. Entertainment has been pretty big as well. Training is one area, and we separated training and enterprise for a variety of reasons, but training specifically, the more you can interact with things in your virtual space, the better the immersion, also the better the value, but the more those experiences stick with you, right? And we've noticed that with training, whether it's training someone how to drive a forklift, whether it's training someone how to use very dangerous objects in the space, by putting a tracker onto those objects, I can actually do that. There's a great example of firefighter training, and I believe it's Melbourne. And essentially, it's in a remote area in Melbourne that don't have access to firefighter training equipment, right? You're talking about towers, ladders, simulated heat. So what they did, they actually put a Vive tracker on a firefighter's hose, put it on a hydraulic mechanism, and put that, and then so then you have that. And then you also had a firefighter's jacket with heat pads in it. And in their VR experience, as you got closer, the heat got hotter, but also since you were tethered to a real fire hose, the real weight, with a hydraulic attachment, you felt the pressure of that. And one of the great things about developers they also figured out that one, as you get closer, it gets hotter, because as you know, the closer you get to a fire, the easier it is to put out, right? But also, if you're on your knees and below the smoke, it was also easier, right, to put that fire out. But as the water pressure got harder, being on your knees with a firefighter hose is also a lot harder. So then all of a sudden, training, tactics, the safety of others becomes really, really important. And now you're able to do that in very, very remote areas, very cost effectively. And for those guys, not only to drive value, but also helps to save lives, not those that are in danger of fires, but also for firefighters. And so that's why training is so key. And I think enterprise is also big in education. Education is super critical because this is an area where a lot of schools are expanding but don't have funds, right? So imagine being able to even create a virtual lab, right? And actually putting on trackers to whether they be beakers or other things. So when you, as a student, I don't know how many times, right, in first time in lab class or in lab, people drop beakers all the time. And that's kind of funny when you're in college, but when you're a school with limited resources, those beakers cost money and eventually and oftentimes don't get replaced. So that's one less student with a very critical object that they need to do. Well, I can now put a plastic beaker in a VR space and we can run through the lab experience. And that's why education and having tracked objects is super critical. And I see a lot of head nodding, but the amazing thing about this stuff is you guys already know this stuff, right? And the trackers allow you to tinker with this stuff and really kind of bring your ideas to life. Masters of Shapes. These are one of my favorite developers, and they're based out of LA. A lot of it has to do is because that's what they are. They are a self-funded kind of experiential company, a whole bunch, actually like 5 or 6 super smart guys that want to keep their vision of creating things, so that's why they want to stay self-funded. But because of that, they come up with some of the most amazing ideas of how to use a tracker. So they've actually put that tracker on a 3D printed spray paint can and actually have a fun experience, but more importantly, they created a game called Cover Me. Cover Me is actually a Vive tracker on a mobile device. They bought an off-the-shelf, it's like a plastic gun that you can put your mobile phone into. So if you're playing a mobile phone game, you want a gun, has a trigger. And so they said, let me actually attach a tracker to it. And traditional thinking may seem like, okay, now I have a tracked phone in a virtual space. That's great, except what they did is they said, how do I make an experience where one person in a headset can interact with many people outside of a headset, and all of us can have a really great time. So Cover Me is literally that. You and the mobile device have somebody in a headset, and you're actually covering them. As I move my phone around, I see the track space that they're in, and in the headset, I see the person covering my back. And that was kind of the great experience of someone now having a one-to-many experience. In fact, I also saw somebody do CPR training on a dummy, and so they actually had the person in a headset doing CPR on a tracked dummy. Put a tracker on a dummy, so now I know where the dummy's at. And they took it to another level. Training in a classroom is really easy, especially when you're talking about CPR. But now imagine you're in a headset, you're at a crash site, there's 2 people on the floor, one of you. You need help, media showed up before the rest of the paramedics did. What do you do? Those scenarios gets me goosebumps even thinking about it, but those are real life scenarios that you cannot train for in a classroom. A Vive and a Vive tracker allows you to do that. Now mount that on a tablet, and as an instructor, I can go ahead and walk next to you and actually coach you through it. Or let's say you're not, this is too easy for you. I can add other variables to make that experience even more so. Maybe cause a car explosion, right? And put a timer, all these different things I can do using the tracker. And so we have a lot of tracker resources as well. So one of the goals for this is we want to make sure that whenever we launch products, you're able to create these experiences as fast as possible. So on GitHub, we have a Vive software page that we actually have the Masters of Shapes Cover Me SDK. So you can actually go ahead and integrate your mobile devices. You can actually even use the spray paint stuff in there. And I believe the 2-bit Circus Pinata experience is on there as well. So more and more things are coming online. And also, we're creating some experiences to help you rapidly prototype. So if you are a developer, but you want to quickly try this stuff, as these products are coming on market, we allow you to do that. And it's open source, so you can do whatever you want with that. And also, more importantly, if you have great experience that you want to share, whether it's Vive forums or part of our platform, we're happy to do so. And not only share it on our forums, but we're happy to help you make videos to showcase that stuff. Do with it as you please, create it however you want, but we really want to help you bring your products to life, bring your ideas to life, and actually help you create a path for profitability. And we also talk a lot about this stuff on our blogs. Those that kind of create these different SDKs, SDK code is nothing without documentation. And so there's great tutorials on the how-tos of how to do these things as well. And we're coming up with more and more all the time, and I'd love to hear your ideas. I did want to spend some time with some questions. Just a lot of it has to do with, there's so many things that we want to know about the industry, both how to integrate trackers and also kind of what these areas are kind of growing. And also if whatever I said is complete BS, I'd like to hear it because I think we collectively as a whole are going to solve a lot of these problems. So I'd like to kind of open up, I think there's a couple of mics out here. So if there's any questions, please feel free to come up.
Don't be afraid, guys. Come on. Hey, so first off, where do we get one? Are they available now?
They are available now. So that's a great question because the trackers, since they are developer focused, they're not as easy to find on our website. So they're actually underneath the developer tab. Right, so underneath the developer tab, and we are working with a lot of other manufacturers to bring other products into the market that you can actually attach a tracker to. Right, and even if you have a concept that you actually say, I have an idea, I don't know how to build it, but it should be built, we can also help you partner up with other partners out there in this space as well. Because HTC Vive, we also have an incubator called ViveX. And as part of the ViveX platform, we have partners that can help you build things as well. So yeah, we're definitely open for ideas. Any other questions?
One more. How many, what's the limit? Like, can you have 30? Can you have 50?
Yeah, so there's actually, the limit for trackers is close to, well, there's two things. One, there's a software limitation which is going to expand, right? So in terms of Vive, what is the limit of the number of headsets or objects in a tracked space? As long as they're not blocking each other, you can have, well, we've had 30 headsets on a pair of base stations, right? So, and you can still, I think the most I've seen anybody with tracked objects is 35, I think, in a space. So you can get quite a bit of these things in there.
Hi. So in terms of analytics, what sort of data would you recommend developers to focus on? Because you have all these trackers, I could imagine like a lot more stuff is being collected.
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. I think this has been a great analytical tool of, in general, in the virtual space, there's a new kind of platform ability to kind of create data, right? So it's not only about if you're in a shopping experience, what things you purchase, but what your body movements is as such. So you can use the trackers for a variety of things, really. I mean, there's tracking data aside, if you really even want to actually use, let's say, I think more so for data using the trackers, it's about which objects you want to track and which data you want to get out of those objects, right? And I think it all really goes back down to what business problem you're solving, right? And if there's a problem that already exists in the space and you can virtualize that, do the trackers help you solve that problem, right? Right, and then we do see a lot of companies also use like wearable devices and other kind of heart monitors, things like that, integrate that to an experience, right, as well. And like the CPR one's a great one because they actually have heart monitors that as you get nervous or not nervous, actually, then the instructor can dial up the intensity to make sure you're kind of in this not comfortable range.
Hi.
Hey.
How many Vive do you expect to have in the market by the end of the year?
So, I'm sorry, say that again?
How many Vive do you expect to sell in the market or be available in the market?
Yeah, so we don't necessarily talk about the numbers of how many Vives are out there. And I think, is there a reason why you want to know that number in particular?
Just looking at investment in the space, I'm looking at what size of the market is currently and where it's going. So
totally. We are seeing continuous growth across all segments, although I can't actually comment on the numbers directly. From a VC perspective, I think when you invest in a market, it's really about the company. And I think you're probably looking at, depending on which type of company, if it's a non-general consumer-focused company you're investing in, like enterprise type of company, location-based, then it's, at the end of the day, it's really what value that company is bringing. And those revenues are more directly...
I'm looking more at consumer focus. So,
more consumer focused?
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I can't really necessarily talk about those numbers, but we're seeing growth across the board in all different places. But also headsets right now don't translate to the number of people using Vives or VR. Because if you go to an IMAX, if you go to Magic Mountain, Disneyland, you're seeing the massive throughput. I mean, we've had, I don't know if I can say this number of how many demos we've had at Microsoft Store alone. I'm looking at our PR guy. We've had hundreds of thousands of demos in a few months at Microsoft. And so that's a lot of awareness, and as we kind of pull through.
That's great.
Yeah, and in fact, we're also building Viveport Arcade that allows those that want to get into location-based a tool that allows you to quickly find the right piece of content, developers to make money off that content so it's not pirated, and then you to even have a demo or tutorial experience that integrates into that experience. So headsets aside, I think there's a lot of resources and infrastructure that we're investing in that allows companies that you're looking at to be profitable in this space.
Great, thank you.
Great. And I'm out of time, but if there's any other questions, great, guys, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.